everyone, welcome to World Insight, coming to you from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, South Korea's President Park Geun-hye is refusing to step down as huge crowds of protesters demand she resign. Will Park become South Korea's first president forced out of office? People in the U.S. are still reeling over Donald Trump's surprise election victory. His controversial campaign rhetoric was often unclear. As America's future hangs in the balance, political experts around the world are asking themselves, what now?
The fact of uncertainty is in and of itself.
And we begin today's show with South Korea. Over the weekend, tens of thousands of protesters took to the streets of Seoul to call for President Park Geun-hye to step down. Opposition leaders have threatened to impeach her if she doesn't. Our panel will discuss Park's uncertain political future. But first, this background story.
Implacable anger. Last weekend, tens of thousands of South Koreans held protests in Seoul, calling for embattled President Park Geun-hye to resign.
Even regular people like myself came out here to add power to depose Park Geun-hye as she is still staying in office shamelessly.
It was the third massive anti-Park protest since prosecutors began investigating her for having improper ties with alleged criminals.
Politics
and the South Korean economy are stagnant. We need further action from the government, but now it's such a mess. I hope this demonstration can rouse civilians and encourage politicians to work with a bigger sense of responsibility so that the country will become better.
Prosecutors are set to question President Park over allegations of political corruption. She is accused of allowing her friend Choi Soon-sil to manipulate power from behind the scenes. It will be the first time a sitting South Korean president has been questioned by prosecutors. The so-called Choigate crisis has engulfed her presidency.
최순실 씨는 과거 제가 어려움을 겪을 때 도와준 인연으로
President Park has publicly apologized for her poor judgment, fired several staff members, and even accepted the opposition party's choice for a new prime minister. But none of these actions have quelled voters' rage. Park's approval rating hovers at around 5%. She recently announced she is earnestly considering ways to normalize state affairs. Regardless what the proposals may be, Park has a lot of hard work ahead.
And for more on President Park's crisis, we are now joined in our Beijing studio by Professor He Wenping from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. In Seoul, South Korea, we are joined by Dr. Choi Chun-hum, senior researcher at the Korean Institute for National Unification. I want to welcome the two of you, but may I begin with you, Dr. Choi. 260,000 people, that's the number police gave over the weekend for those rallies against President Park. Of course, the protesters said themselves it's about 1 million. How long can President Park still hold on?
how
long can President Park still hold on?
Yes, my guess is as long as she does not have any indictment from the court or a prosecutor, so she can remain in her power. Still, there is no particular problem to stay in power, according to the Constitution.
When you look at it, Dr. Choi, the number of demonstrators certainly have already rivaled the number of the last huge demonstration back in the 1980s in South Korea. This is really unprecedented. With that, how much will this president still function?
Well, normally, yes, in terms of state governance, it is really a crisis for South Korean government. But still, there is the normal functioning, except for the brew house. The brew house has some, there are a lot of reshuffles, so it is very difficult to function normally, but still it functions, I think so.
The government is still functioning, but the Blue House is in deep crisis.
Right.
So let me ask you, Professor He here in Beijing, first time prosecutor going to question a president in the office. What would that mean?
Well, yes, that's mean a crisis for the President Park's governance. Of course, even though the Blue House is still functioning, but I don't think it's functioning very well because now there are many unpresidential things now happening. One unprofessional thing is there are such a big number of people that are all, full on the street. So that will becoming increasing, I think, pressure on the President Park, even though, according to the Constitution, she remain having that position, but she is under this, the unpresidential pressure, that's for sure. So that will give him, I think, how long she will remain on that president's position is fully dependent on how much she will get more and more. If more and more, like what happened when we see globally, like in the Cairo, in Egypt, when the people full of the street, and then even also the elected former President Morsi cannot stand for. So I think another unprecedented is this prosecutor coming to now questioning her. And she also made a recognition saying now she had been doing something wrong, like passing this document to her close friend for editing. So that's the thing people think is unbearable.
So from now on, what can we expect? After the questioning from the prosecutors, what are some of the next steps can we expect? And how are those next steps likely to impact on the credibility and capability of this president? Dr. Choi, I have to invite your wisdom again.
Yes, under the South Korean current constitution, President Park has immunity, actually, from prosecution, except in case of treason, but can be investigated. That's why President Park accept investigation by prosecutors on 17th of this month, November. So that means we have to wait for the result of prosecution. Still we don't know what kind of indictment the President Park will get. So still this is a actually long process. Even though hundreds of thousands people demonstrate demanding her resign, but our country is a legal system, so we need to apply for the constitutional procedure.
Right. So let's take a look at in history what has happened with those presidents in South Korea who have been accused of. The President Park Geun-hye isn't the first South Korean president to be accused of corruption. Roh Moo-hyun was elected in 2003 only to be impeached 1 year later on charges of election fraud. He returned to the office 2 months later after the impeachment decision was overturned. When his term ended, however, Roh was accused of bribery. He killed himself, committed suicide in the year 2009. Bribery scandals also hurt Lee Myung-bak's presidency. He left office 2013 with low approval rating. So those are some of the recent cases of the top political leader in South Korea involved in some legal issues. Coming back to you, Dr. Choi, how would you compare President Park this time, the allegations against her and the anger against her, to some of the previous cases we just mentioned?
Yes, you just compare with the previous former South Korean president's political corruption. But the previous South Korean president corruption has relatives who has corruption to get the money from the big companies, and but now President Park has no relatives. Nowadays, Miss Choi Soon-sil, her confidant. She is not a relative actually.
Right.
Is a we can say a close friend. So we have to strictly speaking. So there is a little bit of differences from Park Geun-hye's case from other previous South Korea president scandals. So we needed to still also in the first during the first President Park's apology, she said that she has not wrongdoings in terms of funding or raising and embezzlement or something. So we still have to wait.
All right.
Actually, President Park excluded her relatives.
Yes, indeed. She, of course, has been talking about her governing style and corruption-free. She has showed the press how she is having a very simple lifestyle, even though she lives in a multi-million-dollar house herself. But having said that, though, Professor He, obviously, according to Dr. Choi, she had leeways because some of the hard evidence has not directly come to her personally. And yet, this fanfare of her being corrupt and the public sentiment, together with the strong feelings, of course, from the opposition party, when they are mixed, what could that mean? What kind of a chemical effect would that, in a way, create?
Yeah, if those two things, accusations are mixed, that will be a big bombing. I think that will be quite a big blow. Maybe just let her just down from that position of president, because now there are two kinds of accusation. One is this leaking documents. She just passed this speech like to the close friend, and her close friend even stepped in the national issue, a state affair, because she doesn't have any government title with her. So that's one thing that's making a lack of transparency about the governing. And also the opposition party accused her, saying she, mismanagement and also like short of all those capacity for governing the country in a normal way. So this is one thing. Another is corruption. I don't see there are too many differences between the close friend or the relatives. Our South Korean, colleagues mentioned. President Park is not doing things like with the relatives, not like those previous presidents of South Korea. But even though today's her close friend like Ms. Choi, because now the investigation is going on deeper and deeper, saying there is someone from her cabinet, maybe under her direct order, saying push those business leaders to give a huge donation.
There are still a lot of things that is unknown at this moment. I'm sure with the investigation, it's likely to have more facts revealed to the public. But it is not just corruption, this specific case. It is a lot of anger coming from other issues. Dr. Choi, about some of the key policies she has drawn up. For example, Dr. Choi, people are talking about the comfort women issue that President Park has, in a way, reached a consensus about history with her Japanese counterpart. And yet, as we are part of Asia, it is a very sentimental issue, very emotional issue. And she came into office very strong on this issue, and yet, of course, kowtowing to certain political forces elsewhere. She changed, apparently, her position. So a lot of people have very different views about that compared to hers. Dr. Choi.
Well, yes, you're right. Many people has different ideas and a different view from President Park. That is true. But yes, there is some demonstration against President Park's dealing with the comfort woman. Some people say that President Park is hurry to conclude the comfort woman issues with the Japanese counterpart. But still, there is, I think, another factor will be the economic factors. I think the first, the most important factor is the state governance and the state, how to deal with the state, affairs. President Park has not just or collect direction to deal with the state governance and the state affairs. That's true. And but the behind the story, behind the factor will be the most important factor is the economic factor. During the 4 years, President Park's terms as president, the South Korean economy has plunged into the actually a chaos. Compared with the previous President Lee Myung-bak, the state budget deficit has increased 55% up.
Right.
Also, that there is a national deficit also increased over more than 50%. And the most important thing is that the young generation does not have any suitable job, even though they want to get a job. That's the real problem for the youngsters, young generations. That's why many of the young generations came into the street and to demonstrate, to protest President Park's administration. That's another big issue. But we can see South Korea has real problem. The real factor is the economic factor.
But on the other hand, yes, the economic factor is
the political factor. Yes. Sir.
Yes, indeed. Dr. Choi, you give a very insightful answer to that. But also, there's other factors. We have to name them to our audience. These are all important. When they're combined, it's likely to create something that's likely to shaken the presidency. The other thing is, what about South Korea's alliance relationship with the United States? U.S. presidential election certainly expressed very different views about where that should be like. While South Korea tried to struggle with itself to find a way out. At this moment, many are also wondering in South Korea, if I understand right, the further closer relationship with Japan, is that the way out, as South Korea and Japan traditionally have not enjoyed friendly relationship, to say the least? Dr. Choi.
Well, yes, there is some issues. The United States sometimes ask for South Korean government to be close with Japan, and admonished to conclude some intelligence cooperation with Japan. Yes, that's the but the opposition party blaming President Park's dealing with information exchange with the military information exchange with the Japanese. But the most important thing is when you look at the demonstrators' protest, the content, there is no particular anti-foreign slogans or anti-foreign remarks among the protesters. So far, there is no particular, particular things to blaming any countries. But in fact, in retrospect, during the President Park's, administration, 4 years, actually, South Korean government, Park's government, tried to engage China very nicely, actually. She attends the 17th anniversary of the anti-Japanese demonstration or something, anniversary, okay? Even though United States,
yes, there was
doesn't want
there was a time when China and South Korea were very close, but at the same time, we later found out with the nuclear crisis on Korean Peninsula, the two countries certainly have very different views on the solutions. Having said that, let me come back to Professor He. A lot of factors combined. Of course, we are only observing something that's happening in that country. It's their decision. But from an international relations expert's perspective, what do you make of all of these international and regional issues cooking together with the resentment against the economic disparity and, of course, this crystallization of it, the corruption case?
Yes, there are many factors now play their parts. In terms of international relations, I think President Park also had some misjudgment about how to lead South Korea from the way forward. You know, during the past, before this comfort women has been done with Japan, before this SAT missile deployment issue has been shunned with the United States, actually South Korea has a very good, flexible position between those triangle relations with China, with Russia, and also with US and even with Japan. So because all those parties, they want to have embraced South Korea, they all want to work together with South Korea.
So you're saying South Korea plays its card very well earlier, and yet now it limited itself to one option.
That's true, but because now the room for playing around now is shrinkled. Even now it's very, very limited because they are tied with Japan, with US. There's no other room to play around. So that's why it triggered, I think, those anger, resentment from opposition party, from the people from South Korea as well.
All right, and before we go, I would like to come back to you, Dr. Choi. From now until the election, the end of next year, how much chaos do you think politically is still expected in your country? And how is that likely to have an impact?
Actually, before any kind of indictment to pop up, I think there is some kind of there are a lot of I think protest will coming up, but at the end of this year, I think the people are really calm down because President Park has only 1 year to remain as a president. So I think people are very, very cautious about which one will be suitable for our country.
I see.
That means the resignation is okay, or whether it is okay, or the impeachment is okay. But still, I think there is no particular alternatives. My guess is impeachment is not possible. Also, neither step down is also impossible, because President Park already said that she will do her best to calm down and control the state business, actually. So we'll see. Yeah.
Already a lame duck president, that's for sure. Further investigation going on. A lot of uncertainties. Uncertainty themselves are risk already. But we have to open our eyes and ears to look for more what is going on over there in the country. Thank you so much, Dr. Choi Geun-hye and also Professor He Wenping. Really appreciate it. Thank you. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. The Hollywood star and billionaire businessman Donald Trump is going to be the next U.S. president as America's future hangs in the balance. Political experts around the world are asking themselves, what now? Watching World Insight on CCTV News. Donald Trump doesn't move into the White House until next January, but at this moment, he is already the president-elect. People around the world, together with American think tanks, have already started to analyze how he will shape the country over the next 4 years and therefore having its impact on the rest of the world. This week, in an interview series entitled What Now?, we look at Trump's stance on foreign policy, China-U.S. ties, and U.S. economy and that of the world as a whole. Today we speak with Bruce Jones from the Brookings Institution about Trump's stance on world affairs. But first, this background story.
Donald Trump will lead the world's largest economy starting next year, and discussion about his policies both at home and abroad are sizzling. During his election campaign, some of his statements on foreign policy surprised the world, including his criticism of U.S. intervention in the Middle East.
We went from mistakes in Iraq to Egypt to Libya to President Obama's line in the sand in Syria, each of these actions have helped to throw the region into chaos and gave ISIS the space it needs to grow and prosper. Very bad.
Trump has also slammed America's failed attempts at nation building.
It all began with the dangerous idea that we could make Western democracies out of countries that had no experience or interest in becoming a Western democracy.
Trump touts himself as a smart businessman and says he will end Washington's costly practice of providing subsidized protection to America's allies.
Our allies are not paying their fair share, and I've been talking about this recently a lot. Our allies must contribute toward their financial, political, and human costs.
But after winning the election, Trump assured South Korean President Park Geun-hye that U.S.-South Korea ties remain strong. Trump has also reached out to the one person that many West politicians dislike the most.
We'll do fine. Believe me, we're going to do fine. But having Russia on our side, instead of, these guys want to start, some of them want to start the Third World War.
Trump's unorthodox statements have many analysts questioning whether he's able to do the job. His foreign policy is extremely simple. U.S. interests come first. He says he wants allies to pay for U.S. military support and wants better relations with Russia. Trump's critics say he is dangerously inexperienced, while some say his remarkable win is evidence that U.S. voters want the government to forge a different path. America has become increasingly inward-looking since the Great Recession. Trump could be the first president since World War II to break Washington of its habit of meddling in foreign countries' domestic affairs.
Bruce Jones, welcome to CCTV News World Insight.
Thank you for having me.
Looking inward or looking outward? This is a big question facing the president-elect, Mr. Trump. From your perspective, given his campaign rhetorics and the recent words he expressed to the media after election, what would you say?
I think we're entering a period of serious instability in international relations. The question marks about what direction Mr. Trump will take in his foreign policy will add to what is already a sense of instability in world affairs. So I think we're going to see some chaotic times ahead.
People are talking about the lack of mandate for this president-elect, the unprecedented phenomenon, it seems. But others are also suggesting about the capabilities of your system. What do you say, this mixture, lack of real concrete things, but at the same time there is a system? Will this time it work magically once again?
This is an election that's going to test America's political institutions, but so far they're responding. We've seen an entirely peaceful handover of power. We've seen a gracious shift between President Obama, or a gracious welcoming by President Obama of President-elect Trump. We're seeing an orderly composition of cabinet and transition. So it remains to be seen. So far is that America's political institutions will weather the test.
The president-elect now selecting his team. We do not know who he will be put in the key positions at this moment.
Correct.
When shall we expect it?
I would say you'll probably start to see some of the key names over the next week to 10 days. Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Attorney General, those kinds of positions I suspect we'll start to see very soon. What is striking to me is that most of the names listed for state, defense, intelligence, etc., are names that could credibly have served in many previous Republican administrations. They don't seem to follow the kind of quite radical positions that he took during the campaign on things like NATO, the Asian alliance structure, etc. They're quite different. And a number of the things that people like Jeff Sessions, who've been very close to him, have said suggest an approach which is more consistent with American strategic policy than one would guess from the election. So we don't know. We generally don't know what his strategic policy will be. The fact of uncertainty is in and of itself consequential in strategic relations. I think we do know that he will have a warmer relationship with President Putin than Mr. Obama did, or that Mrs. Clinton would have. How long that will last, what the consequences of it are, that remains to be seen.
Talking about President Putin, let's go into the U.S.-Russia relations. During his campaign, of course, Mr. Trump was rather more friendly to Russia than any of the previous presidential candidates in history. Having said that, though, how much do you think, from the policy perspective, U.S. should put Russia back on its map? To what extent, and how it should, in a way, interpret the meaning of Russia these days in international relations?
I would say that over the last 2 years, we've seen a Russia, which, remember, has a smaller economy than Italy,
but
France,
strategically,
being able to cast a big strategic shadow, much larger than its actual capability. At the same time, many would argue that the United States, which has a vast strategic capability, has cast a somewhat smaller shadow. In my mind, it would be wise to correct that imbalance.
how?
Well, that's a complicated question. But Mr. Trump appears to take a different approach, which is to say, in effect, that he has an appreciation for Mr. Putin, and that in his view, the things that Mr. Putin have done haven't threatened America's vital relations, vital interests. Now, I think it's fair to say that the steps that Mr. Putin has taken so far have not threatened America's vital interests. What's not clear, though, is whether the next steps that Mr. Putin would take would threaten our vital interests.
What are you suggesting?
Well, we don't know. Mr. Putin has proven to be extremely successful at wrong-footing the United States and wrong-footing the West and undermining democratic processes in the West. We don't know how far he'll go. Now, it's possible that Mr. Trump's approach of accommodating Mr. Putin, of welcoming Mr. Putin, etc., will Mr. Putin's nervousness and tensions and anxieties and angers. Let's see. I suspect we will see turbulence in that relationship, too.
But even if President-elect Trump wants to get closer or ease the nerves of Russia about the Western circulation, so-called, will the Congress and the Republican establishment work with him? Is a big question mark, isn't it?
It's a big question mark. It's an extremely unpopular stance within the Republican Party, within the foreign policy elite. It's not a stance that cost him any votes electorally, but it is very unpopular within the foreign policy establishment, including with many of the names that he's bringing forward for state and defense. I think that Russia policy will end up being very complicated. It may seem fine from a distance to see some alignment of style and interests between President Trump and President Putin. But in real terms, I think we'll see a lot of turbulence in that relationship as well.
What about the U.S. alliances around the world? First of all, NATO. Of course, President-elect Trump earlier during campaign talked about NATO should buy their own way of having protection from the United States. That's one thing. The other kinds of alliance in Asia, Northeast Asia, Japan, South Korea, the President-elect earlier suggested that they should be on their own to protect themselves. Here, people interpret it as probably these countries have to have their own nuclear weapons. We do not know.
We don't know, and it was striking that yesterday President Trump came out with a very strong statement supporting South Korean defense and stating the United States would stand with South Korea on defense against the North. It seemed to change or even reverse his position during the campaign. So we don't know what his actual view is. His earliest statements about NATO were quite radical. His lesser statements were much more about the spending. There's nobody in the United States that doesn't think that NATO members should spend more on their defense. That's a common position. The question is whether he will reinforce and live up to Article 5 of NATO, or will he undermine that?
Meaning
the response of the United States to provide for the territorial defense of Europe, to be responding if there's a military attack on Europe. That's a key question. The bargaining over the price, the bargaining over the money, that's not the key question. The key question is he challenging the fundamental principle that the United States would stand up for the security of its core allies? And the fact that we don't know that answer is already consequential in terms of the calculations of the key capitals.
we have seen some of the Western leaders expressing their congratulations to Mr. Trump, the president-elect, but at the same time, they mainly saying in the names of their country, they would like to congratulate the president-elect rather than in their own name, together with the name of their country. So that's an interesting phenomenon if you look at the history.
I think world leaders are profoundly surprised by the result. Most of the positions that he took in that campaign are ones that most of the world leaders we're talking about, Germany, France, Britain, etc., will not welcome. His stance on climate change is going to be profoundly unpopular. But again, we don't know what his actual stance will be. So I think there's an important time to be calm, to be patient, to see what unfolds in terms of his cabinet and his key appointments and the stance that he adopts. It's early days. It is perfectly possible that he adopts a more moderate tone and approach that's more consistent with traditions of American foreign policy, but it's perfectly possible that he does not.
And what about the war against terrorism? That, of course, is a big chunk of issues over there about Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq. Some of the warfare started from the very early Republican administration, continued until Obama, and now President-elect has to handle it.
The United States has been in some form of military engagement in the Middle East since roughly 1983. I don't think that's going to change under President Trump. I think there's every evidence that he will intensify the tempo of the campaign against ISIS. I think President Clinton would have done the same. I think he will intensify military action in Syria. I think President Clinton would have done the same. I think he will do it in very active coordination with Russia. Already President Obama was acting in coordination with Russia, although at a fairly low level. So this will be a substantial change in politics, but I'm not sure that it's a radical change of policy relative to what President Clinton would have done.
Very important, Mr. Jones, is that whether the Trump administration is going to still make use of the Obama administration strategies, which is to use local forces, local militaries of the countries in which there are wars against terrorism, not necessarily using mainly the U.S. forces. That's a huge change. President-elect Trump, where is he likely to go?
I don't know the answer to that, and we don't know the answer, but
No.
I would rephrase the question, because actually large-scale American ground forces in the Middle East was the exception, not the rule. The exception
Particularly
was,
at the end of the Obama administration.
well, I'm thinking primarily about the huge surge in the number of forces in the Middle East under the Bush administration. That was the exception. The norm has been reliance on local partners, use of air support, intelligence, special forces, etc. That's the norm. We saw a reversion to the norm under President Obama. What stance President Trump will take, we don't know.
About South China Sea specifically, the U.S. during Obama very clearly it does not take a position with or against any party in the region as long as there's freedom of navigation. And also we've seen the U.S. alliance in the Southeast Asia, for example, with the Philippines, with Malaysia, has been evolving at the end of the Obama term particularly. So under the current circumstances, given the rhetoric during campaign for Mr. Trump, which direction is it likely to go?
Again, we don't know. He did not say a great deal about South China Sea during the campaign. I think he's more likely to put an emphasis on economic issues in the first. We've already seen a lot of rhetoric around currency manipulation. I think from the Clinton campaign you heard a lot about reciprocity and economic investment. Either way, you were going to see an increase in tensions on strategic relations between the two countries. Whether or not Mr. Trump can pursue those objectives while still maintaining some degree of balance and predictability and calm in the relationship, that remains to be seen. I think that there's no question that China will be at the center of his Asia strategy. Whether that's, as I say, it's a mix of tension and partnership. But China looms very large in American strategic thinking now for obvious reasons.
At this moment, a lot of the chaos going on politically in South Korea.
Yeah.
Important part of the six-party talks. Earlier six-party talk didn't move anywhere with the so-called strategic patience. And now DPRK is developing its nuclear capability much faster than it used to be.
Correct.
Nobody knows exactly what's happening, including China, at this moment. So is he equipped with the wisdom and the skills of dealing with this?
He certainly doesn't have the experience. He doesn't know his way around the nuclear issues. He doesn't have the relation with China. He will have to learn very quickly on the job. I hope that he will have appointed people in defense and state and the intelligence community who do have the relevant experience and the relevant wisdom. I hope that that's the case. I think this will come up early, and I think it will test him severely. It's an issue which is extraordinarily complicated. There are no good answers. It is possible that a deeper crisis would also produce a deeper sense of alignment between the United States and China, but that remains to be seen. So I hope he has the wisdom to appoint people around him who have the experience and the depth on issues like this that he does not have.
What is the best scenario? What is the worst scenario for you, sir?
Best scenario is that in office he adopts a more measured posture than he did during the campaign and puts around him people who understand the traditional statecraft of American foreign policy, even though it requires some adaptation to new realities. The worst case is a huge degree of unpredictability, which will fundamentally destabilize an already tense set of international relations.
It's a critical moment, and thank you so much for giving us so much insight at this moment.
Thank you for having me
Mr.
here.
Jones, such a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's Bruce Jones, the Vice President of the Brookings Institution, talking to us earlier. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of a program, visit our website. Just type World Inside CCTV News into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tianwei, and everyone on the World Inside team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.